Welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 38, Delegates Usage in C Sharp part 2. In the previous session, we have seen a very simple program, a very simple employee class where we have created a promote employee method. And if you look at this promote employee method, the problem with this method is that we have hard coded the logic of promoting employees. Okay, the logic based on which we promote employees is basically hard coded. And we know that these delegates are extensively used by framework developers. Now, if you are a framework developer and you're developing classes and methods for a framework, then you want your classes and methods to be reusable, and you don't want to be hard coding logic like this. So if you hard code logic like this, you are preventing your class from being reused. So now let's go ahead and see how to make this method reusable with the help of a delegate. Okay, in part 35 we have seen how to use the basic syntax of a delegate, and to create a delegate we use the delegate keyword. So delegate, and we know that a delegate syntax looks much like that of a method. Okay, a delegate will have a return type, it will have a name, and then parameters are obviously optional. Okay, so now what we are going to do is, all we have to do in this method is we want to replace this logic based on, instead of hard coding this, we want to be in a position to be able to pass in maybe a method as a parameter here. Okay, we'll understand that in a bit. So let's say, if you look at this condition, what is this condition doing? Okay, this condition will either return a true or a false. Okay, employee.experience greater than or equal to 5. If that is true, then the employee is promoted, otherwise it doesn't get into the if block. So this expression basically returns a boolean true or false. So our delegate also should return a boolean true or false, and then let's call this is promotable. That's the name of the delegate. And if you look at this expression, it's actually making use of an employee object. So for our delegate, we need to pass in an employee object. So let's say EMPL. Okay, that's it. So we have created our simple delegate. So what will this delegate do? It's going to return a true or false for the passed in employee. If the employee is eligible for promotion, then it returns true. Otherwise, it should return false. Okay, so now what we will do, we need to replace this expression with that delegate. And the way to do it is like this. So into this method, I'm going to pass in another parameter, and that parameter is going to be my delegate. So I'm passing in a delegate as a parameter to this function. Okay, so I'm passing in this delegate. So let's call this is eligible to promote. Just a meaningful name. Okay, now look at this. We are passing in a delegate as a parameter to this promote employees method. Now we know that a delegate is a function pointer, in the sense this delegate will be pointing to a function. Okay, so at runtime what happens, instead of this delegate, when you invoke this delegate, it's going to invoke that method to which this delegate is pointing. Okay, so effectively this function is taking in another function as a parameter. Okay, so anytime if you want to pass in a function as a parameter, then think of delegates. All right, so now we passed in this delegate as a parameter. So how are we going to replace this logic here? Is get rid of that logic there, and then simply say, okay, if the employee is eligible to promote, and obviously this will take an employee object, so let's go ahead and pass that. So now there is no logic whatsoever here. It's just a delegate. The frame. We know that this delegate is going to return true or false. If it returns true, then that employee gets promoted. Otherwise, he will not. So where is that logic of how to promote an employee is based on? That will be decided by the end user who is going to make use of your class. Now, if you look at your class, it's very clean. It doesn't have any hard-coded logic within that. So let's go ahead and see how to use this class. Okay, so the person who is going to use your class now to call the promote employees method. When he calls the promote employees method, initially it was just employee list, but now it's going to be a delegate as well. So you have to pass in a delegate as well. Now we know that a delegate is like a class. When you create an instance of a delegate, the constructor will actually take in the name of the function. And we know that that function signature has to match the signature of the delegate. So let's go ahead and see that. So now this employee promote employee method is also taking another parameter, is promotable, which is nothing but a delegate. Okay, so if you look at this, it's the same example that we have seen in the previous session. We have an employee list, and to that employee list we have 4 employees. Okay, now let's see how to invoke the method. First, we need to create the delegate. What is that delegate? Is promotable. So I'm creating an instance of this delegate, is promotable. So promotable, maybe just give it a meaningful name, is promotable. That's the name of the delegate. So we are creating an instance, and we know that to the constructor of this delegate we have to pass in a function which has got a boolean return type and which takes an employee object as a parameter. So we first need to create that function, and it is that function where we define our logic on how we want to fire our employees, promote our employees. So let's go ahead and let's say public boolean, let's say promote, and this method should take an employee object, and let's say emp. And now here you will provide your logic. If let's say emp dot maybe experience is greater than or equal to 5 years, then return true. Else return false. Okay, so if you look at this method, it returns a boolean and it takes in an employee object, and we have to pass that method to this constructor of the delegate. So we are going to pass in that promote method. So we have our delegate created now, and let's mark the static so that we don't need the instance of the class to invoke that. All right, so we have the delegate. Now what we do is we pass in that delegate as a parameter to this function. That's it. So if you look at this function now, if you look at this code, we haven't hard coded any logic in our framework method. Our employee class is going to go into some kind of a framework, and we don't want any kind of hard coded logic there. So we move that out, with the help of this delegate. Okay. So this delegate at runtime is promotable delegate is actually pointing to this particular function, and this function will return a true or false. If it returns true, then we know that that employee is eligible for promotion and he will be promoted. Okay, this way actually you can decouple the logic from your framework class and method, which makes your classes and methods a little more flexible. So if we go ahead and run this now, as far as the output is concerned, it doesn't change in any way except that we have restructured our program using delegates, which makes it more flexible. And you might be wondering, all right, just to do this simple thing, initially it was console.writeLine, you have your condition hard coded here and it was very easy. But now, just because you are using a delegate, okay, first you have to create that delegate, and then you have to create this method which this method signature should match the signature of this is promotable delegate, and then you need to create an instance of this delegate, and to that instance, to the constructor of the delegate, you have to pass in the name of the function. So a lot of steps to do these simple things. Actually, do we have to do all this? Not necessarily. If you're aware of lambda expressions, these lambda expressions are actually based on delegates. So instead of creating this this method and then creating your delegate and then to the delegate passing in this method, what you can do is actually you can get rid of this function altogether. You don't require that anymore. and you don't even require this delegate. You can get rid of that as well. Now in inside this method, you can actually pass in a lambda expression. Okay, so instead of this delegate, what you can do is, now whatever goes in here, it will operate on an employee object, and it is going to return a true or false. Okay, so what we can actually do is, so you can say, now just to give it a meaningful name, employee, such that emp dot, let's say, experience greater than or equal to 5. Okay, so you can use this inline lambda expression here instead of creating a delegate, a function, and then making the delegate point to that function. Okay, so you can do that this way. So if I go ahead and run this now, it's just going to be very simple. I mean, the same output, except that we are now using lambda expressions instead of creating an instance of a delegate. It's the same, behind the scenes. What happens is the runtime actually creates a delegate, creates a function, and then passes it to this particular framework method, which does its job. Okay, so I hope you have understood that the fact that using delegates will make your programs more reusable. All right, that's it in this session. And on this slide, you can actually see some ASP.NET and C# interview questions. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.